Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me in this series on leadership potholes and how to avoid them. In a previous session, we talked about the self-indulgent leader, the narcissistic leader, somebody that's wrapped up in themselves and self-absorbed and pampering themselves and all that sort of thing, self-centered. This time, we're going to talk about sort of an opposite problem, but it is a problem. It's the self-neglecting leader. And I see a lot of this. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in many other leaders that I know. So we take care of everybody else, but we neglect ourselves. Here's my premise in this. Listen to this. If a leader isn't healthy personally, he or she will also create an unhealthy culture in their family, business, church, or other organization. So in other words, it's vitally important for us to be personally healthy if we're going to be a healthy leader and create healthy families or organizations. So there's a guy named Peter Scazzero, and he wrote a bunch of books about emotionally healthy spirituality. And that's an interesting thing. You would think anybody that's spiritual would be emotionally healthy, but no, not necessarily. Sometimes we're not emotionally healthy, and many leaders are driven. They're driven by insecurity. They're trying to prove something. They're trying to get accepted. They're trying to overcome insecurities and childhood deficits and bullies from their youth and their parents and whatever, and they're trying to prove something. Some of them become workaholics. They get their joy and their self-esteem, their self-image from the hard work and accomplishments that they do. I remember once myself, I was out on a date, and one of the common questions people ask on dates is, what do you like to do for fun? So this woman I was out on a date with asked that question, Jim, what do you like to do for fun? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, I like to cross things off my to-do list. Well, as you can imagine, that was a one-time date. She didn't think I sounded like a very fun person at all. I just like to cross things off my to-do list. But that's a typical workaholic. A workaholic gets their perks, their self-image, their self-esteem by all the things that they accomplish and they do. Wow, isn't that something? And you know, it's interesting. There's an occupational hazard of caregivers. Caregivers can be pastors, doctors, nurses, teachers, counselors. There's an occupational hazard. Well, what's that, Jim? Well, the occupational hazard is we take care of everybody else and we don't necessarily take care of ourselves. When I was growing up, we had a doctor named Dr. Rothman. He was a friend of my dad, and he was a good doctor. I think he gave good care to our family. But it always kind of puzzled me because he was grossly overweight. I'm not there to crack on the guy, but you know, it just seemed kind of odd. He was trying to help us be in better health, and here he was. It seemed like he wasn't taking care of himself. Wow, what an interesting thing. So Dr. Rothman should have taken the medicine first that he was trying to give to us. He should have taken care of himself. There's a great verse in the Bible in Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 6. And the maiden says this. She said, they made me caretaker of the vineyards, and I didn't take care of my own vineyard. Isn't that something? We can take care of everyone else. We can take care of their physical health, their spiritual health, their emotional health. We can be a counselor, a friend. We can do all this kind of things, but not take care of ourselves. Wow. I had an uncle, Uncle Bob, when I was growing up. He was a great guy. And he'd come over to our house from time to time and just chat with my dad and mom and me. And he always left with a certain phrase. And it really kind of irritated me at the time. He'd say, Jimmy, take care of yourself. That's how he ended it. Jimmy, take care of yourself. Well, I had just become a Christian. And I was in kind of radical camp of Christians that believed in denying yourself, crucify the flesh, sacrifice for others, lay your life down, all that kind of stuff. And so here he is saying, take care of yourself, Jimmy. And I just thought, man, he just doesn't get it. He's not very spiritual. He doesn't understand the Christian life is about sacrifice and laying your life down. And boy, he just doesn't get it. Well, as time went on, as my life got on and I got older, I began to realize, Uncle Bob might have been onto something. There was another side to this story. And you see it when you go in an airplane. Have you ever been on an airplane? Hopefully you have. I've probably been in hundreds of flights. over my lifetime. And one thing always happens at the beginning, the masks come down, and the flight attendant says, if the mask comes down, if we lose oxygen, put the mask on yourself first before you try to put it on anyone else. And to this day, if I was in an airplane and the mask came down and we were losing cabin pressure, I would probably put it on the person next to me. That's just how I am. I don't think about myself first. That sounds selfish. That seems self-indulgent. I don't want to do that. I want to take care of everyone else. But the people that devised those flight rules realize that if you don't have oxygen yourself, you're not going to be able to help anybody. Soon, you will be suffocating yourself and you'll be worthless. And so put the mask on yourself first. Boy, that's hard. I still don't think I could really get that, even though I've heard that hundreds of times. Well, I wonder about this workaholic thing, because the Apostle Paul gave some signs of possibly being a workaholic. Now, he got a lot done. He accomplished a lot. He saved thousands of people and planted churches, amazing guy. But he said in 1 Corinthians 15:10, this great verse, he says, by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace didn't prove in vain, because I worked harder than any of the other apostles. Wow. I love that verse, by the grace of God, I am what I am. That sure is a good line. But think about this. If you are boasting about how hard you work, you're boasting about your work ethic, that could be a sign of workaholism. Now, I shouldn't be giving a hard time to the Apostle Paul, the mighty man of God that he was, but if you're proud of your work ethic, if you're proud that you work harder than anyone else, you stay later, you come earlier, you do more work, you're harder working than anybody else in your company, your team, or your church, you might be a workaholic. Well, there's other passages about the Apostle Paul. I love Acts chapter 20. I've been reading that lately in verses 17 to 35. And he was saying farewell to the Ephesian elders. This is the last time he's going to see them. And he describes what he's done when he was with them. And he basically said, I worked night and day. In addition to the ministry, I worked hard to supply materially for my needs and the needs of those around me. He said, this line I actually posted on Facebook several weeks ago. I consider my life of no value to myself. My purpose is to finish my course in the ministry I received from the Lord Jesus. Well, that's interesting. My life's of no value to myself. It's all for the kingdom. It's all for Jesus. Well, that's a good thing. But it's interesting because he also says in this same passage of Scripture, he tells the Ephesian elders to be on guard for themselves. Be on guard for yourselves and for the flock. So isn't that something? Before you can take care of the flock and be on guard for the flock, you got to take care of yourself. You have to be on guard for your own spiritual life, emotional life, physical life. What an amazing thing. And so Paul, in this passage, he also says he worked hard with his hands, and he quoted Jesus as saying, it's more blessed to give than to receive. How many of you believe that? I believe that. And so I give and I give and I give and I give. But you know what? Even a giver needs to learn how to receive. Isn't that something? And Paul says a lot of interesting things to Timothy. We're not going to go through the whole thing. But to Timothy, he also challenges him to don't neglect your spiritual gifts. Don't neglect your personal life. He even tells him to drink a little wine for the sake of his stomach ailments. In other words, take care of your physical life. He says, may your progress be evident to all. Pay close attention to your life and your teaching. You know, it's not just pay attention to your teaching or your ministry. Pay attention to your life. Pay attention to your example. Wow, what an incredible thing. And in chapter 1 of 1 Timothy, chapter 1, he warns about people who've been shipwrecked. They've been shipwrecked because they didn't take care of their own spiritual, emotional, and physical life. Wow. So, what are the consequences? This is really important. What are the consequences if we don't take care of our own life? Well, there's really two things that I want to emphasize right now. One is it's inefficient. We're inefficient unless we sharpen the saw, as Stephen Covey says in his famous book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In other words, he tells a story. He says, picture a guy out trying to chop a tree down with an axe that has a dull blade. And he's just hacking away and hacking away and hacking away. He's spending hours on this thing and really not hardly making a dent on the tree at all. And so finally he comes in for a second to get a glass of water, and you say, well, you know what, maybe you could chop the tree down more efficiently, more effectively, if you had a sharper blade. Why don't you take some time and get the blade sharp and then go back and try to cut the tree down? Well, and of course the guy says, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to sharpen the saw, sharpen the axe. I don't have time for that. I got to go cut the tree down. Well, if you do not have a sharp blade, it's going to be really hard to cut the tree down. And Stephen Covey really got this from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 10, verse 10. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen its edge, then one must exert more strength. The duller your blade is, the more human effort it's going to take, and it's going to just be frustrating. So that's the first thing, is inefficiency. It's inefficient to have a dull blade and not take time to get it sharp. The second thing is really important as well. Danger. It's dangerous to not take care of yourself. And I remember when I was living in Florida many years ago, and they had these torrential downpours in the summer. Sometimes they only lasted 15 or 20 minutes, but whoa, the sky would fall and just a lot of rain. And I wasn't really used to that. And I was driving on the freeway one day, and I was trying to get on the on-ramp, and the car ahead of me just stopped. And I jammed on the brakes thinking that the brakes would work. But the problem was I hydroplaned. Have you ever heard of hydroplaning? You know, it's like being on ice, but it was just water. It was just rain. And so I pushed the brakes, and my car goes onto the freeway. It spins around, and it's turning toward the oncoming traffic. And I got smashed right in the front end by an oncoming car. And it was all because I had bald tires. I hadn't taken care to maintain the tires. And here's a crazy principle here. So the tires worked fine when everything was dry, when we have a wonderful day and driving slow, and the tires were just fine, even though they were bald. But when there's a storm, when there's a lot of water on the freeway, when I'm going fast, bald tires are dangerous. So that was an incredible lesson to me. You have to prepare as if there's going to be a storm. A lot of leaders do just fine when there's no storm, when there's no crisis, when there's no danger going on. But when the storm comes, they fail because they haven't taken care of their tires, their life, and whatever. One interesting thing, too, you might doubt me on this, but dull kitchen knives are more dangerous than sharp ones. Isn't that crazy? Because if it's dull, you end up, cutting yourself and getting in wrong angles. Sharp knives are better. Sharpen your knife. Well, like I said earlier, there's 3 areas of self-care that you need to attend to. Your spiritual life, your emotional and mental life. Stephen Covey breaks that into 2, emotional and mental, but I think they kind of fit together. And your physical life. And here's the interesting thing too. They're all interconnected. If you're exhausted physically, it's going to affect your spiritual life. If your spiritual life or your emotional life are depleted, it's going to affect your energy level and your physical health. And we see this in 1 Kings 19 with the prophet Elijah, great man of God and everything. But in chapter 19, he had been depleted. He was spiritually depleted. He'd called down fire. He'd called down rain. He's doing all these incredible things, but he was spiritually depleted. And he was emotionally depleted. It was an emotional thing. He defeated all these false prophets, and then Jezebel says she's going to kill him, and he's just emotionally, spiritually worn out. But he's also physically worn out. He's tired. He hasn't slept for a while. He hasn't eaten right. And so it's interesting. How does God revive him? He says, hey, here's something to eat and get some rest, get some sleep. What an amazing thing. But Elijah, because of being spiritually, emotionally, and physically depleted, he was depressed. He was on the point of practically being suicidal. He said, Lord, take my life. I don't even want to live anymore. Why was that? Because he was depleted. And Jesus says to his disciples, Mark chapter 6, verse 31 in the King James Version, come apart and rest a while. Some preachers like to say, come apart so you don't fall apart. You need to come apart and disengage from all the rat race of things and get yourself restored and deal with the depletion. Get your tank filled up again. So, as we end this session in Leadership Potholes and the problem of neglecting self-care, I want to ask you some questions. So, we need to ask, what are some of the ways we can maintain or recover our edge? I should have had a prop on this, but you know what an edge is. So how can we get our edge back? That is such a crucial thing. Our spiritual edge, our emotional edge, and our physical edge. How can we do that? That is such an important thing. And it's a little different for each of us. Some of the things work for everybody. God gave us a Sabbath day once a week. I don't think it has to be Saturday, but there needs to be a day, some rest in there. There needs to be some vacations in there. I recommend personal retreats. That sure helps. But it gets down to these two questions. And you have to ask yourself, I don't know the answer fully for you. What are the activities that fill your tank? After it's done, you say, wow, I feel better. My tank is filled spiritually, emotionally, physically. It might be worshiping the Lord. It might be interacting with family or friends. Physically, there's certain things that are important if you want to maintain your physical health. So what is it? Write it down. What are some things that are energy in and filling tank activities? And then the second thing is, what are activities that drain your tank? We all have things that drain us. I'm not much into logistics. I'm not much into numbers. I mean, there's certain things that I'm good at, but there's certain things I'm not good at, and they drain me extra quick. And so be aware of that. Be aware of what fills your tank. Be aware of what drains your tank. Well, I encourage you to take some time in the next day or two to process these questions and ask the Lord to help sharpen your saw. If you're getting dull spiritually, emotionally, physically, what's it going to take? You need an action plan. How is your spiritual life, your emotional life, your physical life, how are you going to get the edge back? God can help you on that. Well, anyway, as my Uncle Bob reminded me many years ago, take care of yourself, my friend. Take care of yourself. That's not selfish. That's not bad. That's not self-centered. That's necessary. Take care of yourself. God has an investment in you, and he wants you to take care of yourself. God bless you today.